Hello, I'm Craig and welcome to another episode of FootballKitMemories. Today I meet journalist and broadcaster Mark Machado. In our chat we cover Mark's career in podcasting and radio, how he sees that industry changing, and we find out how a lad growing up in Ealing became a Liverpool fan. During the show I asked Mark to pick out 3 of his favourite football shirts and tell us a little bit about what they mean to him. There's a Liverpool shirt from the 90s, the Miracle of Istanbu'l, and something a little bit more obscure from France 98. You can listen to this and other episodes of Football Kit Memories on all major audio platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please do subscribe, share, and above all, enjoy the podcast. Okay, so today on the podcast, I'm joined by journalist and broadcaster Mark Machado. How you doing, Mark?
I'm good, Craig. Thanks for having me on the show.
Mate, fantastic to have you on. I'm really excited to speak to you. So, mate, do you want to give us a little bit of background? Tell us who you are and what you do.
So I run alongside my good friend and now business partner, Sam Delaney. We run a podcast company called 1129. We make a whole load of podcasts, especially a lot of kind of football content in the kind of similar vein to this show. Where we kind of take a deeper look. Obviously, Sam's famous for his deep dives, and maybe 1129 should be well known, or should be well known, for kind of taking a deeper look at some of the more cultural elements to football, like the fashion, like the music, all that kind of stuff.
So I'm a really big fan of the podcast you do with Tim Vickery and Dotun Adebayo, the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. What's that like to work on?
Oh, it's amazing. So obviously Tim and Dotun have been doing the World Football phone-in on 5 Live overnight for, I think, near on 20 years. If not, I think they had their 20th anniversary 2 or 3 years ago now, actually.
Right.
And then when we went into the first lockdown, the BBC decided to put a pause to the World Football phone-in, possibly because football wasn't taking place. So they thought maybe there's nothing for them to talk about, which I wasn't convinced about. So I know Dotun a little bit because we used to work together at Radio London. So I gave him a call and I said, Dotun, do you fancy doing a podcast? It's not an exact replica of World Football phone-in. In fact, it's quite different. They take a classic game and look at the music and the culture and the politics and of course the match as well, and kind of look at what the world was up to, it might be globally, it might just be UK, was through the prism of football and kind of what they can learn. So the first game they did was obviously, like all good Englishmen, was the 1966 World Cup final.
Right.
But we've done loads of, I think we're up to about 35 episodes now. So
nice. Well, I listened recently to the As If Kapadia one where he talked about the Maradona film, and I really enjoyed it. It's well worth a listen. Anybody who hasn't heard it yet, for sure.
Yeah. Asif Kapadia was kind of I started following their account, I think, on Twitter, and it turned out that he's a World Football phone-in fan. He actually said right at the end of the podcast that, if it wasn't for the show that Dotun and Tim did, he wouldn't have been that interested in someone like Maradona. He wouldn't have known so much about the story of his life. Because the era that we've grown up in, people like Messi and Ronaldo, almost every time they kick a ball, it's on British television somewhere. Where if you go back kind of 30 years ago, that wasn't the case. You kind of got a little bit of the rest of the world, what was going on outside the UK every 4 years or every couple of years in a major tournament, and that was it, right? Someone like Maradona from South America, you almost never saw.
I really do miss that kind of exoticism of like foreign football and foreign teams. Like, do you remember Transworld Sport I think it was on Channel 4, and he used to like show you highlights of the Argentine league? You think, fucking hell, this looks amazing. Look at all these fans and stuff.
Yeah, I never understood. So when I was a kid, I was obsessed by that TV show. I'd wake up, my routine, and weirdly, my mum mentioned it to me yesterday. My routine was getting up at like 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning, go downstairs with my duvet, watch that, then start to watch the cartoons, and then I'd get ready for whatever sport like my parents would cart me off to that morning.
Right.
Because I think my parents very much took the parenting tack off. Let's just make him play as much sport, me and my sister, on a Saturday and Sunday morning, so they get tired out and then knackered for the rest of the day, which I think has totally worked. It seems like a good tactic to me.
Definitely, mate. So have you been working in the kind of the audio space for a long time then?
Yeah, so I started at the BBC just over 10 years ago, I think.
Right,
So yeah, I always knew I wanted to work in radio. Obviously, when I was a teenager, podcasts weren't really a thing; they didn't really exist.
right,
Kind of started in community radio, then blagged my way to the BBC, where I was there for about I think 6 or 7 years, maybe a little bit longer. And
right.
then I went to talk radio, mainly because I was like when I was a child, I was obsessed by talk sport. I was obsessed by uh, music radio and talk sport,
Yeah.
and because I just wanted to talk football the whole time. And when I found out that talk sport were kind of creating a current affairs radio station, I was like, yeah, I want to try that because I also wanted to be at the beginning of a radio station as well.
Right,
When I was there, at a like, there's a yeah, working commercial radio is very different to working at the BBC.
right.
But I ended up doing a lot of stuff for Talk Sport as well, which was great. And then just before lockdown, I went full time into 11:29. So yeah, it's been it's effectively been my whole professional career has been in audio,
Right.
and I absolutely love it. It's brilliant.
Have you seen the industry change quite a lot?
Yeah, definitely. Right. So podcasts are the major disruptor in the industry.
Right.
Right. The other thing that's happened to kind of go to drill into it a little bit, is particularly in commercial radio, is that the advertising, the old kind of old model was that you started something,
Yeah.
and if you built an audience, advertisers would come and you'd be able to monetize it. People don't really talk about this, but effectively in what is often referred to as kind of old media, that just doesn't work anymore.
Right.
So for newspapers and increasingly for radio and TV, that model doesn't work. So the industry is generally moving towards subscription. So people don't want to see adverts, but people are happy to pay a small amount for premium content. If you
Right.
look at something like Netflix, I remember reading or hearing about the idea of Netflix, and basically someone going, you're going to pay a subscription every month, but you're going to have really great content whenever you want it.
Right.
And I was like, well, why would anyone ever do that? Just pay for Sky.
Yeah.
But then actually, kind of 10 years later, that is the way the world's going, right? And actually, Sky Television, Sky TV seems a little bit archaic now. And that's why the industry is moving. I don't know whether it's just the time that I've been in the industry that there's been so much change in
Yeah.
terms of the way people, and when I say industry, I mean the way people consume content, right? Or whether it's always like this, whether, you know, between, like say if you went from the 1950s to 1960s, whether there was this amount of change in that amount of time as well.
Yeah.
I think people though appear to have an insatiable appetite for content, and they're always looking for something new. The one thing the two things that have also happened is that there's been a proliferation almost of different channels. So if you look at how, Talksport is a good example. It started off as just, well, obviously it started off originally as Talk Radio, became morphed into Talk Sport, and then it's become, Talk Sport, Talk Radio, Talk Sport 2.
Yeah.
And they also at that point kind of grew Virgin Radio and stuff like that, and it, brands become bigger. If you look at like Radio 1, there's like Radio 1, One Extra, One Dance,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff. But I can see what the temptation is to do that, but also one of the sad things with that happening, and this happens in TV as well, is those big national moments that used to go into the playground and talk about the next day and go, "Did you watch this?" And we'll go, "Yeah, we watched this." So I remember when I was a kid and Phil Mitchell got shot, for example. It was like did you watch it? And if you didn't watch it, you either felt left out, or you had to have a bloody good reason and defence why you didn't like EastEnders in your house.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've lost. But the one area where that still exists is sport, and in particular football, right?
Yeah.
Because it's such a big cultural thing now, that we all come in on a Friday morning when we used to be able to go to work and school and stuff like that, and go, "Did you see Liverpool lose to Manchester United last night? What do you think of the free kick? What do you think of Bruno Fernandes? What do you think of Reece Williams? All that stuff. Those moments of kind of national unity almost are back together."
That's really interesting, mate. It's a really good point. I guess like as well, like having worked like professionally in the industry for a long time, What do you think of kind of like, like a bedroom podcaster like me kind of doing stuff like that? Does that bother you guys professionally? Do you think that it seems to be a more democratized thing, open to all, but there's a lot of people making content out there that isn't up to scratch, perhaps?
So for me, I actually love it. I think that's brilliant. I think that's the best part of the medium is the fact that anyone can do it. I think I look back, I look at, I talked about how quickly the industry seems to be changing, and obviously the massive driver of that is the accessibility of technology.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to sound slightly political, and it's not intended to, but essentially, I think from generation to generation, we like to within our families or within just among our circle, we like to see kind of improvement in quality of life.
Yep.
So, for example, the first generation after the war aspired to own their own home, and then there was a generation that wanted their own home and a television set and possibly be able to learn to drive, and then there was a generation that wanted to drive, TV, a home. And then, do you see what I'm going with that? And I think sometimes, especially around the political discourse that we've had in the UK, there's almost like people seem to think that actually their kids, their younger generation, aren't able to achieve what they've achieved. But actually, I dispute that claim, because I think actually technology, the fact now that we all walk around with £1,000 piece of kit in terms of our phone just hanging out of our pocket, it is an incredible thing. And I think, one of the things we're able to do by having this technology all consumed, tiny amount of into a tiny handset is create things like a podcast. Within, you could record something in your bedroom and within minutes have it edited and go, someone could be listening to it in any part of the world. You could probably listen to it in space, I'd imagine. And I think that's absolutely amazing. And I think that's what's going to drive change in the world and make the world a better place to live and bring the world closer together.
Right. Oh, mate, that's really interesting. Bit of social science on the pod. Never had that before. You've raised the bar academically, mate. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
So I wanted to ask you as well about the podcast that you do with Paul Danan. I'm a big fan of that, The Morning After. What's he like to work with?
Paul is lovely. He's one of the nicest people in the world possible. It's obviously well documented if you listen to the podcast that he's got a lot of personal issues. I mean, that's essentially what the podcast is about, right? He's a recovering addict. He's been in rehab, I think, 27 times now. When we started the podcast, which was approaching 2 years, I think in March or April, he'd only been in rehab 22 times.
Right.
So working with him is brilliant, but obviously there are moments where it can be a challenge.
Yeah.
But that's part of what it is, right? So with that podcast, it's not just about putting something out for people to listen to. It's also, hopefully, and I know a few people who've got in touch with us who listen to it regularly do tell us this, it's meant to be a bit of a a journey through addiction, and it might, hopefully it's helping some people out, because it's about mental health, it's about the arts, and it's about how it's about knowing that there is other people out there who have exactly the same issues as you.
Yeah.
And you are not alone.
Yeah. Do you know what I really like about it? I think it's very candid, as I mentioned, but I think as well, like, there are episodes that are hilarious and episodes with really funny stories. You get amazing guests on as well, but there are also episodes that are quite dark. And I think it's the kind of honesty of that podcast that I really enjoy. And I know we mentioned off air that it's been really successful as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, it gets a lot of it's got a lot of attention over the last year or so. It's, as you say, it's very warts and all, right? It's never contrived. It's never most of the time going into it, we absolutely have no idea what we're going to talk about. Sometimes when his anxiety gets the better of him, he'll be on the phone to me going, what are we going to talk about? I'm like, I don't know. Just let's switch on the record and just go for it. I think we're approaching 100 episodes now.
Right.
It's you're never meant to say this, but it's not for everyone. But also, actually, I think it is for everyone, because I think it is warts and all, isn't it? And it is like, this is the roller coaster of the emotions of life. Sometimes, as you say, we'll record and Paul's in great form and he's funny and he's hilarious. And we get some great stories out, and then other times, and we record and you can just tell that he's not in a good place.
Well, I mean, I'd recommend to everyone to listen to that and subscribe to that podcast. I really enjoy it myself, mate. So, mate, the last question I want to ask you on your career, I did a bit of Googling, obviously, did a bit of research, and I assume that you're familiar that you have a namesake on the west coast of America, tattoo
I
artist.
am,
Yeah,
yes,
Mr. Cartoon. He's actually called Mark Machado. He's got the same name, and
yeah.
he designed the Cypress Hill logo, and he's tattooed everybody in hip hop. So like 50 Cent, Eminem, Dr. Dre, all those guys, as well as Freddie Lundberg. So there is a football link there as well.
Oh, I didn't realize he'd done Freddie Lundberg. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, so he is 1,000 times more successful than I will ever be. He has achieved everything I ever wanted to achieve by being friends with just about every hip hop artist in the world.
Yeah.
Also, there's a great documentary about him on Netflix, which I highly recommend watching. So what he did is he is part of a movement right at the forefront of a movement where they essentially brought in kind of Mexican, Latin culture into the kind of mainstream
Right.
of not just American, but I suppose kind of wider hip hop culture that's kind of all over the world. So what he is a tattoo artist. He's an artist by profession who transitioned to tattooing, which I suppose everyone did because you're not born a natural tattoo artist.
Yeah.
But then he's kind of he's developed on from that. He's a creative director as well. I would love to meet him. I'd love him to get like maybe a big old Mark Machado tattoo on me somewhere as well.
One day.
Machado's quite a strange name to have in the UK because in the Spanish-speaking world and Portuguese-speaking world, it's a very popular name. It's like being called Smith in the UK, right? But obviously, in England or in Britain, we don't have that many Spanish speakers, so Machado is considered quite exotic over here. But actually, it's pretty bog standard, which is why he probably goes by the name Mr. Cartoon, I'd imagine.
So, should we talk about some football shirts?
Yeah, man, let's do this.
So, mate, I guess like the general question before we talk about the three shirts you've picked is, what do football shirts mean to you? Are you a collector, a buyer, an admirer?
I'll be honest. I've like every few years I reassess my relationship with football shirts. Right.
Right.
So I used to when I was a kid, and I know we're going to talk about this in a bit, but when I got my first Liverpool shirt, I basically lived in it from I think I must have been how old have I been? About 9 or 10.
Yeah.
When I got it, and I didn't take it off till I think I was about 12 or 13.
Right.
When I started to realise the existence of women. And
They don't like football shirts at that age, unfortunately.
no, they're not as into it as other, as men are, I suppose. I'd say in general, my kind of dress sense is there's like basically sports wear, t-shirts, tracksuit bottoms and jeans. Like that's it. Like that's pretty much everything that's in my cupboard. During lockdown, I think I've managed to avoid wearing anything with a button on, any sort of button shirt for about 12 months now, which is amazing. Sometimes I think football shirts are amazing and I want to wear them all the time.
Yeah.
And then I'll go through periods where I'll be like, do you know what? It's a little bit naff for a man in his 30s to wear a football shirt.
Yeah.
I think I've got quite a lot. I've got quite a lot of Liverpool shirts. I generally tend to be given them by my family members for Christmas or
nice.
or birthdays, mainly because they can't think of anything else to buy me.
Right.
In terms of collecting, I would love to collect shirts, to be honest, but my real collecting passion is comic books, and I spend too much money collecting comic books. And I'm aware it's a bit of I'd say as in terms of investment, collecting football shirts is probably, I'd imagine, probably a better thing to invest in than comic books, because most comic books you buy for about £4 and end up being valued about less than 50p within 6 months. So
fair enough. It sounds like they're a lot more expensive to collect football shirts. You're probably doing the best thing, mate. Keep away from it.
Yeah, well, the thing is, right, you're probably right, but Yeah, comics tend to spiral because you end up buying, if you, oh God, I can't believe we're talking about comic books, but basically, if you're having a good week, if Marvel and Co have really done a good job with their marketing, I suppose
Right.
you could end up buying like 15-20 books a week.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So you gotta like rein it in and not let it get out of control.
So, right, mate, let's talk about your first shirt. So we touched on it just there a minute ago. It's the Liverpool home shirt from 95 to 96 season. It's by Adidas.
Yeah. So this is my first ever shirt
Right.
that my parents bought me. I begged and 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 begged them to get me a Liverpool shirt. So my first kind of, so my dad's from Sri Lanka, my mum's from India,
Right.
and as you can imagine, having that kind of cultural background at home, they weren't. I don't want to say they dislike football. That's not true. In fact, if anything, they've kind of grown to appreciate it. But that football wasn't a natural thing for them.
Okay.
It took me having to go to school, and basically the other kids, I suppose, were just like, yeah, football's amazing. I remember being a very young child, and whenever I'd see football on TV, my thought was, I want to like this, but
Right.
I don't. Obviously, when you're like five, when you're 6 or 7 years old, you just don't have the patience to be able to sit through a 90-minute game.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not seeing your parents doing it, especially if there's kind of no one in the house possibly to show you what's going on. But
Yeah.
I got obsessed by it from a very young age. I got obsessed by collecting stickers. I'm not. I don't want to say I'm like any sort of. I'm not anywhere near like an elite level athlete. But in my kind of class, I was all right at playing sport.
Okay.
So I kind of wasn't the last kid picked, which I think kind of helped. And then when the school holidays came about, so I grew up in Ealing, there
Right.
was QPR were running a camp for kids during the holidays, and a lot of my friends were going on it. So I asked my parents if I could go on it, got sent on it, got there, and I was just turning up. I must have been quite young. I must have been about 7 or 8, I think. And
Yeah.
I was just turning up in whatever my mum dressed me up in that morning. And I had a little pair of football boots and took my lunch in and was having a great old time. But all the other kids have kits and stuff like, and were like fully bought into it. So
Yeah.
eventually I managed to persuade my parents to get it. And luckily for me, the year that they did it, which was 95-96 season, was Liverpool's 100th anniversary.
Ah, right. Okay. I didn't know that. It's a centenary.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's why this kit has a special kind of white, almost cricket collar,
Yeah.
and also has the emblem is
Yeah. It's in a bigger kind of shield, like a special kind of crest thing, I guess.
and also there's kind of mesh netting kind of on the shirt, isn't there?
Yeah.
At the time, I'll be honest, the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, I just wanted. I didn't realise at that stage of my life that football teams, and actually maybe this is around the time when getting into changing football kits on an annual basis became a really key part of a club's marketing strategy.
Yeah.
That they changed their kit. So I was expected to like basically go to the shop and get the classic kind of Adidas kit with Carlsberg at the front and the three stripes on the side.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then we got there was this new kit, which I was like, all right, yeah, if this is what they're playing in, like let's do this.
Yeah.
And then I basically fell madly deeply in love with that shirt, that particular one that I was wearing every day of my life. And I think my mum couldn't wash it quick enough, and it was only ever to be washed when I was asleep.
So why Liverpool then? Did you just like the shirt? Or was there a bigger connection there with the club already?
So what happened was, and I remember this relatively clearly actually, when I think I must have been about 6 or 7, somebody asked me what football team I supported,
Right.
and because no one in my house had shown any inclination to football, I had absolutely no idea. I
Oh,
didn't know. I probably at that stage I wouldn't have been able to name you 3 or 4 football clubs.
okay.
But my cousin, who's about 10 years older than me, went to the same school as me, and I think at not half time, at lunchtime or after school, I saw him and I just asked him what team do I support? Like, I told him what had happened, and he said, "Oh, you support Liverpool,"
Yeah.
and then that was it.
Job
It
done.
was yeah, job done. So there's no. I'd love to say that I was at a match and I fell in love with them,
Yeah.
or I saw Kenny Dalglish or Robbie Fowler or Steve McManaman in a shop and he said, "You son, I'm meant to support Liverpool."
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't anything like. There's no romantic story like that. It was just my cousin told me you support Liverpool. Ironically, now he's a Brentford season ticket holder and goes week in. Well, he would do obviously if we weren't in lockdown. Go
Yeah.
week in, week out, and Liverpool has now become a very distant second team for him. But,
Interesting.
yeah.
And how thankful are you these days that it isn't Brentford or QPR? What could have been, you know?
Yeah, do you know what though, right? I think it's a very different experience, obviously, being from West London and supporting. So most of the kids when I was growing up in my class supported the two biggest teams in my class would have been Manchester United and Arsenal.
Right.
And then Liverpool, I think there's about two or three of us who supported Liverpool. And then a few of the kids supported QPR, like maybe two or three, and almost no one supported Brentford. Even though from my school you could walk to Brentford in about 20, like you could walk to Griffin Park
Okay.
in about 20 minutes. I think it's a very different experience supporting your local side to supporting a club that's much bigger and further away. And sometimes I don't want to say regret because I think regret's the wrong word because obviously Liverpool fans have had it much better than most fans that have over the last forever, basically. And QPR and Brentford have all had moments where their very existence of the club has been questioned. So I don't want to be like, oh, it's much better to support your local side, but there is definitely value in supporting your local team. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm not a child and not with young kids anymore, but I do think that more and more people are tending to be more passionate about their local team. A good example of this actually was in the last championship playoff when Brentford played Fulham.
Right.
I was in the pub. It was, in that kind of what now seems like a 2-week window when pubs were still open between the first lockdown and going into whatever tier we went into.
So much. What 2 weeks that was.
Oh, well, best 2 weeks of my life. And I was in a pub in Ealing Broadway, and there was obviously Fulham's a relatively local side as well, and there was quite a lot of people supporting Brentford in that pub as their second team, and there was a lot of kind of local passions, I suppose, were on fire.
Yeah, it's nice to see.
Happened.
Yeah, nice to see. So, mate, we're going to move forward now for your second shirt, moving to a very, very successful period for Liverpool, much more successful, I think, that previous shirt era. It's the 04-05 home shirt by Reebok, and it's the Istanbul shirt, mate. Tell me more.
Oh, God. I love this shirt because obviously, for me, Liverpool have gone on to win the Champions League again, get to other finals, and also now the Premier League.
Yeah.
But I think this happened when I was 19 years old. I was up at university in Aberdeen, and I watched the Istanbul final in the night before my last exam of my first year at uni.
Right.
Which in my friend's room, and I remember at half time it was 3-0, and my mate Paul, who I ended up living with afterwards, who was next door to me in halls, he's from Glasgow, massive Celtic fan, knows a lot more about football than I do, played a lot more football than I have, and he just said at half time, he's like, damage limitation, this can't like that Liverpool got they got to try and not get absolutely hammered. And at that moment, that was probably it was weird, right? Because in my mind, I was like, yeah, you're right. And then within about 20 seconds, I was like, do you know what? Nah, fuck it. Go. Just go. Have a go.
Yeah.
Just throw everything you've got at it. What's the point of being there and just going, do you know what? We're just going to close down. I might as well. I would have preferred them at that point to have lost 7-0 than not to have a go.
100%.
I mean, Jimmy Traore won the Champions League.
Mate, I looked at that team and I just think that is not a vintage Liverpool team. There's some really good players in it. Don't get me wrong. And they spent a lot of money that previous summer, I looked up as well. But there are players that should not have been anywhere near that Champions League final, aren't there?
I still can't fathom how Jimmy Traore is a Champions League winner.
But that makes it all the more sweeter, right? That's why it's special. That's why it's an incredible memory, I think.
Yeah. When you look at when Liverpool won it a couple of years ago now, in 2019, you look at it's a more linear path, right? So Klopp takes over. Klopp gets them to the Europa League final. It doesn't quite work out. They're in the Champions League. They get to the final the first year, but they've got midway through their run to their first Champions League final, he brings in Van Dijk, comes into the side, shores up to defence. They get to the final. The goalkeeper's a nightmare. Salah has to go off injured. They get back the next year. They've now bought the best goalkeeper they possibly can buy, and he's in goal. So they fix that problem, and Salah scores in the first minute. So the game is effectively killed off really early on. It's a very efficient way of doing it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I wasn't happy about them winning it. I was incredibly happy about them winning it. It was a relief. But the way they won it in 2005, when I would have been happy with them finishing fourth in the league, which they didn't. They finished fifth.
Yeah.
And then
which is crazy.
Yeah. And then Everton, that's from a Liverpool perspective, that's quite funny as well, because there was the whole in the immediate aftermath, it was like, oh yeah, well, they've won the league, but as it stands now, they wouldn't be able to defend it.
Yeah.
So UEFA had to basically let them back in the first round of qualifying for it. So they had to go and play TNS in Wales.
Oh wow!
Only about like 6 weeks after they won the tournament.
Right.
In July, I think. So maybe even less than 6 weeks. In the first round, and actually, I think the next year when they got knocked out in the quarterfinals, I think they set they'd won the most amount of games for any club that's ever been in the Champions League, even though they didn't get all the way to the final, just because they started so early on that
they played all the qualifiers.
Which is quite funny. Yeah,
it's an incredible story, and it's a nice shirt as well. I like it. So, mate, let's move on to your final shirt. Now, I really like this choice. You've gone a bit niche here. You've gone a bit different. You've gone for the Paraguay goalkeeper kit from the '98 World Cup, worn famously by Jose Luis Chilavert. And again, it's a Reebok shirt, which is a bit strange as well to have two Reebok shirts picked. What's special about this one for you, mate?
So 98, I'm well into football, like totally into football. How old would I be? 13, I think.
Right.
Yes, 12 or 13, can't remember. And so I'm born on the last day of the year, which is why most people can figure out. Yeah, but it's because
it's complex.
So the World Cup. This is obviously the first World Cup I can remember that England are taking part in.
Yeah,
I was quite invested in the '94 World Cup, but actually, I often wonder if part of the reason why I look at football as such a global thing is because my first tournament that I remember wasn't a tournament that England took part in. That we all had to support Ireland. I don't know how old you were at the time, if you remember.
Yeah, same age as you, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So 98, I was very invested in it. Michael Owen obviously had broken through at Liverpool and got into the England side and was going to score that wonder goal. David Beckham obviously let the whole country down. And watching this tournament was absolutely amazing. It was the first time I'd probably even heard of Paraguay, let alone even had a football team.
Yeah.
And I remember there was one game where which I watched for theirs in the group stage, and they had the most flamboyant, over the top goalkeeper. And obviously, as you said, we talked about earlier, this was a time when you barely saw these exotic players. You were just about to start to see that, actually. You were just about, obviously, Football Italia was kind of in full flow at this point. Or I suppose coming to the back end of its reign on as the kind of king of Saturday and Sunday football television in the UK, and you were starting to see Sky. I think we'd just got Sky Digital possibly in the house at that point, which meant that I was just starting to see football properly, and they were starting to play a lot of other games. A lot of Spanish football and stuff like that was starting to come across. But I never had any thoughts about Paraguay as a nation, let alone their goalkeeper. And you just see this kit, this bright, over the top, amazing football shirt that is so the opposite of, I suppose, of the way goalies in particular, but football in general, is portrayed in the UK as kind of living within itself. and you've got this goalkeeper Silver who insists, according to the commentator, of taking the penalties and taking the free kicks. And I remember at one point, I think it was the quarterfinals of the round before that when they played France.
Yeah, they played. Yeah, it's France in the last 16. Yeah,
last 16, and the game was really close. And there was one, I think France won by a goal quite late on.
Golden goal, mate, in extra time. Laurent Blanc.
There you go. So yeah, it was quite a hard fought battle, and obviously I remember watching it with my dad, and we were both supporting Paraguay, not because we had any massive beef against France, but because France are this giant, big Western nation, and little old Paraguay dared to kind of confront them, and they had this amazing goalkeeper who's a captain, who's a talisman right from the back of the park. And I remember really late on, he goes and he takes a free kick from over the halfway line, which back then you just never saw. Even now, to be fair, is pretty rare. And then he was right in the box for corners, in the opposition box, and he was just so assured of himself. He was like one of those players, even though he played in goal, it was like all eyes on me, and he was going to have some sort of impact on the outcome of the match. He was just brilliant to watch. And then he's a player I think about all the time, because for the next few years after that, and even into kind of like I'd say the mid 2000s, there was a lot of rumours about him joining Liverpool, potentially because Liverpool had a lot of issues at the time around the goalkeeping position. It would have been a great fit in a way, because Liverpool is a slightly bombastic, known for kind of off the kind of crowd that it attracts at the Kop. Yeah. The other reason it would have been a great fit is because it turned out that I discovered this later on, is that he's a massive socialist as well.
Is he really?
Yeah. So the Paraguay were given the Copa America to hold towards the back end of his career, and there's a basic story that he just refused to play in it or get involved in it or acknowledge it in any way, because he basically turned around to the government and said, yeah, football's brilliant and all that, but we need to educate the kids and feed the poor. Why are you wasting your money on this?
Well, there's a couple of really interesting facts about him as well. So allegedly he's punched Maradona and Faustino Asprilla in the face.
Amazing.
Brave man. He once scored a hat-trick for Vélez against Ferro in the Argentine league as well, which is just incredible for a goalkeeper, right?
I just want to know more about him. I can't believe that no one's made a documentary about him in English. Like, I'm sure there is. I'd imagine in Paraguay that his shadow still looms large.
Definitely, mate. Well, he's an interesting chat, man. It's an amazing shirt to pick, mate. Well, thanks so much. It's really cool chat, mate. Some really good stories. Thanks a lot for your time. I was going to ask you as well, like, what's next for you? What's coming up?
We've got loads more podcasts that we are doing. I've started a cricket show as well, because I'm mad into all. Well, I say all sports. I'm mad into football, cricket, and rugby. Right. They probably in that kind of order. Though playing it, I play rugby. I would play cricket. I rarely ever play football now. That's only because no one ever asked me. Right.
Left on the bench.
Yeah, left on the bench nowadays. Yeah, we're working. I'm working on this cricket stuff. It's called the Murali End. So if you're into cricket, please give it a listen.
Link it out.
Or give it a follow on Twitter.
Yeah.
And hopefully, we've got a few other things, but I'm not sure I'm allowed to mention them yet because there's loads of contracts and stuff going on. But yeah, keep an eye on 1129 Media and see what we've got coming up.
So there you have it. Massive thanks to Mark for sharing his football kit memories with me. You can follow me, my own collection, on Instagram, or get in touch via Twitter or email. Do make sure you follow Mark and check out all the podcasts he mentioned. Links to those in the notes section. But other than that, I guess that's it. Until next time, I'll see you later.